This is the second patch in 2 months where we've received basically a patch notes worth 27 pages long, and alongside that we've also had a kind of a weird interaction where you get even more elo this patch than previous patches, and I think as everyone tries to scramble around and grind as much elo as possible before they fix it, maybe you need a good deck, maybe you need a good deck or two before you jump into the action. And that's that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. Good day everyone, my name's Corn, and as the previous number 69 guy on the leaderboard, well, everyone's climbing so I'm not there anymore, but I was there, trust. I have 7 decks to share with you today. So the last time we made a deck video, we started with US, and I think it's fair that we start with Russia this time. So there are three types of decks I think I want to try to introduce today. One of them is just rather frontline and also with an abundance of artillery focused. One of them being a bit more infantry focused with planes to trade for like valuable targets. And then the last one is a bit mixed, it has VDV, which is really powerful this patch, along with a bit of like variation between the two. So let's begin with the first deck today. It's going to be Guards Motorized, or Moto Guards, probably two of the most popular decks when it comes to fighting on the ground. And so the idea is about, I think this has a bit to do with the identity of these two specializations. For Motorized, they have some of the best infantry that Russia offers, one being the SSO CQC, one being Spetsnaz GRU, and then for Russia, for Guards, you have things like the Armada. I mean, I only have one in this deck. You could bring two if you like. And then also the new, or not like the now back to 300 point T15. And compared to previously, like 1 year ago, when the bars was still 300 points, it is no longer as strong as before, mainly because tank guns now actually deal damage. And that being said, I still think that against the now very popular Baltic battalion, the 57mm on the bars can definitely help against things like the, what do you call it again? The CV90 and Mark IVs and a lot of the Strykers. Just not any Bookers, not any tanks, but regardless, I think like if you save the attackers for the tanks, then you should buy yourself enough time to run away from the fight. Obviously, if you don't fight a lot of like Baltic battalion, or if you feel confident enough dealing with your targets with only the 30mm, even though like the Cornet is still pretty lethal, feel free, because to me, I think it's much easier to use the 57mm than the 30mm, but that's okay. That's okay. It's just up to you, whatever you want to pick. And then the highlights of this deck would be, as the title says, just a bunch of artillery pieces. You have 4 artillery pieces, being the Tornado. This one is HE, and then the TAS, and then the Grad. And each of them have their own rules, and I'll start by talking from, let's say the Grad, okay? So the Grad is basically, you just fire it, draw in a straight line, and then it's going to pop basically every single supply. Sometimes your opponent's backline units if they put it a bit too forward, and then you can even damage transports and infantry, but most notably, like the most important parts are the targets are just the supply trucks, supplies themselves, so your opponent basically are not allowed to resupply on the front line, and then maybe the infantry as well. But to actually deal damage to them, you need the TAS. And the TAS is something that is just extremely lethal, and I think well, now that it actually didn't get much of a nerf compared to previous patches, so the short range one is still pretty fantastic. Some people do run the cluster grad, and I think that's also fine as well. You just need to take a couple less units here in the support tab, maybe like one less book for AA. But to me, I personally prefer to just pop supplies with a really cheap grad. It's only 125 points for the cost. For the amount of value that the HE grad is for the cost, it's pretty cheap. And then next you have the Mista, which also is good at popping supplies if you know where the supplies are, but also sometimes, you see a unit just standing there out in the open or just hiding in a bush, and you kind of want to poke at it. Then you have your Diversanti or one of the laser like trucks to actually laser it, and then you use the laser guided artillery shell to actually just pop it really quickly. Most units should die, or vehicles should die in 2 shots. Tanks, or US tanks in particular, would take 3, and then But then, like, you know, it doesn't really happen that often. But still, that's okay. This thing reloads fast enough, so if your opponent's not gonna react easy, that's gonna you're gonna get him anyways. And lastly, you have the tornado, and this tank, sorry, not tank, but this vehicle is pretty lethal as well. It is by far the only MLRs in the game to have this much damage. And on top of that, because it also shares the same resupply value and also the resupply time with the US variant, uh, keeping this on the field is only going to benefit you in the long run. And I run the HE. Actually, that's the only reason, because like if you run the cluster one, then it deals the same amount of damage. It actually deals less damage than you would expect it to, but only with a bit more blast radius. So I do personally prefer running the HE variant. And on top of that, if today you happen to need to destroy like a really annoying building that has good line of sight, then normally six tornado rounds would be capable to leak basically every single building out there. And you don't have to worry about, like, for US MLRs, you need like 8 rounds, and that's not really a good number to get. It's just half the salvo here, so that's why we like the Tornado HE. And you know, if you get lucky, you can even snipe some packs, some supplies, maybe some backline units, much better than the Grad can. And then I think most of the units here, I guess I'll talk a bit about the motorized air tab here. So you have two options actually. One is the M2, which is has a bit of cluster bombs. You cannot really run the more expensive one unless without having to like drop a plane here and there. And but that's fine, I guess. If you really want to guarantee your kills on tanks, then maybe try to run this one, the 310 point M2, which is going to be really expensive though. And the SMT is mainly just here for dealing with like infantry blobs, especially from the US side, because ultimately at the end of the day, you really rely on artillery to defeat your American adversaries. And last but not least, just a seed plane, you know, one of each, nothing too much. And for the rest of this deck, I think I'll cover it later, because like some of the things here are pretty like repetitive, but maybe I'll talk about the IVs besides the T15. So the motorized really synergizes well with guards because of its 8-man squads and that kind of stuff. You can put a lot of like the cheap Sturmoviki, the Moto Pekota inside the 24-seater Dural, so this can carry 3 squads. And also, like, you have all these infantry are fairly cheap, and then you kind of use them to hold the line until something actually threatening appears, like for example that for it be a tank or something else, you have the AT Spetsnaz GRU to deal with it, or like some CQC infantry, then you let the SSO roll in, along with the support from a Barbars, or even if a Terminator if you feel like it. Now this patch, this is extremely cheap and you can definitely run it. And then for like engagements at range, you could either go for the T80UM. This is a pretty cheap tank up in the opener. I really prefer running this tank. And then eventually you phase them out for T90s and also T14s. But if you don't have the tanks around, then still the B-15 Kurganet is a pretty good option for dealing with like anything in general, as long as you're not in its face, which it can kill you faster than you do. And last but not least, just some like random units just for utility. You know, this one has a good anti-tank, just one less RPG than the Spetsnaz GRU, but way less survivable and way less lethal to infantry. And also the Metas, which is also a bit of a like dealing with armor. But I think if you feel like it, you can drop a couple units here, and then bring more Moto Pekota, because they are kind of like your line holder. And the second one would be this mechanized motorized. So it basically kind of has the same philosophy, just like the previous one, except rather than an emphasis on really powerful tanks, it now has a bit more infantry that are really good at fighting on the ground, a bunch of BMP2s, sorry, 3s, that really excel in force fighting as well, that can basically, if even one is left unchecked, then it's going to roll through and absolutely wreck everything. And then also a really solid air tab at your disposal compared to like the previous one. So what you have here, I think, like the air tab is pretty similar to the previous one, except you kind of get to choose what extra plane you want. Like if you want an ASF, you can even drop this for something else, but I think this is the cheapest plane I can get to fit it inside, so that's about it. And then for helis, just like the previous deck, they're mostly for anti-air, like the Ochotnik. This one has Iglas only. Same with the Mi-24, the pretty classic R60s. These are really impressive like AA missiles, because sometimes some fighters try to take down the Phantom but end up getting taken out instead. For example, like the Hornets. It's kind of funny. And then you also get 2 transport helicopters to quickly reinforce your lines in case the Urals are still not fast enough. And then you still have this Mi-24K to screen for the Mi-24P, which is a common opener for me, or for anyone else I think should definitely try running these 2 helicopters for an opener. And then the biggest difference I think between guards and mechanized is that instead of like the expensive tanks, you have really cheap infantry and like the cheaper tanks obviously, but they don't do as well. So at the end of the day, I think you ultimately rely a bit more on your infantry anti-tank. So for example, this time I run the Diversanti because I let my snipers have the laser designation. And then this RPG, not only is it cheaper than before, 20 points cheaper, it also goes through the APS of tanks. It is not interceptable by APS, so you can pretty much catch a lot of top tier tanks off guard, or even like Strykers, which is a common vehicle that you can find on flanks as well. And then for the main fight, I think the way that you want to layer your infantry in this deck is by having the Moto Strelky up front, and then it's going to run into either a vehicle or CQC infantry, which is natural. You know, that's how US layers their infantry. So then you tend to keep an engineer Sturmoviki behind it, or the Ognamechiki. So both of these are thermobaric. I actually think it's pretty viable to even run a Soul Shield, so that this is going to be you know, the second one that tanks the damage. And it's also it performs extremely well under pressure because it does not have a thermobaric weapon, and these shotguns actually stay on the squad, stay in the squad for as long as possible until they eventually drop down to like 3-2 models. So I do think that the KSK Engineering Sturmoviki is definitely worth being aware of. So it would be nice if you put the Monostroke up front, Engineering is behind it, or the Ognamechiki, and then or even the SSO, which is like your toughest CQC squad, which in itself, if it goes under fire, then it's probably not ideal. So you kind of want to keep it safe. But when no one's targeting the squad, it is actually extremely lethal, just as the US ones. And then like some AT infantry in the back, maybe another Monostrokey, maybe a Vampire, maybe a Spetsnaz crew. That's up to you. But sorry, at the end of the day, you just gotta make sure that you have enough supplies or ways or methods to keep on transporting these infantry back to the front lines. And then as you try to interrupt your opponent's supply lines with the Grand, with the Tornado, or maybe even the Toppan to just delete frontline infantry along with a bit of help from the Meteorite, these would help you overcome the disadvantages that your Russian T-72s have when they face up against the almighty US Abrams. So that's how I would play this deck. And the next 2 are a bit more VDV focused. This is probably a really well requested deck, or maybe not this one, but like any VDV deck in general. And I've decided to like go a different route because last time I keep glazing VDV guards, so I think this time it's a bit I should, you know, do things for a change, introduce 2 different decks here. One is a bit more CQC focused, but I think I should go through I think I'll go through VDV Coastal first. So the idea of VDV is this patch. You basically have access to 4 Spetsnaz and 8 Sturm, and what you do with these guys is that not only do they have really strong anti-tank, they also have extremely powerful anti-infantry. So they basically have the thermobaric rockets that the engineer Sturmoviki have access to, just one of them, but also 3 rounds, but that's fine. And what you want to do is you put 2 Sturm and 1 Spetsnaz, inside a PTR MDM, and then you just keep base checking your opponent, and then whatever you run into, you will win. You will win without without a doubt. For the most part, unless you get artillery, unless you run into something that's a bit too much to handle. But for the price of these units, infantry only, they are really a force to be reckoned with. So definitely recommend running these two. And if you happen to run into something that's a bit more like unfriendly to your infantry or something that's too tough, then the Morskaya are pretty okay for like dealing with tanks, and also the Trini Berettis that are basically like something that US mains do not like that much. But remember, like this is ultimately only a 12-man squad, so if you run into things like Marine Raiders, Delta Force, this is going to lose in the long run. So, and also they can't really deal with the vehicles, so you kind of just keep this squad safe as you trade in other units with your opponents, and then you still have like Coastal offers some of the best standoff infantry that Russia has access to. The Spetsnaz VMF, the assault one, is really good at like 600 meters range. These guys actually beat Airborne pretty reliably. Oops, sorry, pressed the wrong button. And then the Sapog is also pretty good at dealing with things like the CV90 if you stack two of these on top of each other. Even the Strykers, you tend to get a lot of criticals. So that's another thing. Like, and any tank, even a tank, even though it doesn't deal that much damage, it's going to take a critical. So you could potentially track someone. And then also the VDV has access to like really annoying cornets, and also the Igla if you need some Shurad. And I think that's how you generally play the specialized this deck. If you have just a bunch of infantry inside of these troop carriers that can transport multiple squads, and then you just jump scare your opponent, they're pretty strong. You also have the really good sorry, not TV, the T80 BVM, which is probably the best Russian tank in the game for its price and how it performs. Even though it's not really as good as the Armada, but it's still really like the fast reload, and also the front armor that it gets, and also the speed makes it really impressive. Just not really good for like dealing with javelins because it does not have access to APS, but it's still pretty good. And a cheap gun, a cheap tank gun if you want it, the Sprut. You can even run the Toros Rapira or whatever this is called for a cheaper price, but way less survivability. Also, one more, like a couple more things before we keep going on, is that this deck actually does not really have a good support tab, and the only thing that people would consider strong is the Iskander, but I really don't like this patch, and that's because the aim time of the cruise missiles is pretty long. It's going to be 15 to 18 seconds, and it also flies kind of slow, even though the resupply time is fast. So the downside of this unit is two things. First, the amount of time that it takes for the cruise missile to start aiming until it hits your opponent is going to be around 30 seconds, so half a minute. So you kind of need to make sure that your opponent or that structure is just not going to move. And then on top of that, this is going to drain a lot of supplies, especially when you have two of these. And this is going to kind of affect the way that you can play, which I'm going to go through really quickly. If you're playing on the flank, then it's definitely okay if you run this and then just keep supplying it, letting the most of your squads and also ATGMs like basically force them off your cap, and then you can keep on spamming ASF like the Su-35, the MiG-35 that is also ASF, and then let the Iskanders do their work as they fire basically every 2 minutes or so, maybe 3, and then, you know, send in the MiG-29 for some seed action. That being said, your ultimate tool, your ultimate like weapon, is the Tu-22M3, and this plane is pretty damn good. It did get nerfed, but it's still extremely powerful. It's basically you get 8 bombs, really big bombs, and you can kind of click around the map where your opponents are firing from, where you guess their supplies might be, and it's going to be a really big boom. So you get 8 chances, and because it has 25 HP, it doesn't really get one-tapped. So you kind of get away with it, especially when compared with Seed, and you also get to spot if they have ASF when you do the Seed, so that's also pretty good. So like what you generally do is that you kind of just stall you stall with like your units here, some really cheap units. You can use the Mi-28's really annoying Lemur missiles. Uh, these basically one-tap a lot of things, and two-tap tanks, maybe three. But I think most, like even some of the Shurad out there get one-tapped by the Mi-28, so it's pretty annoying. I think people really don't like this helicopter because it actually got buffed, but it is what it is. So you kind of just stall until you save up enough, or like you call in a bunch of units, and then you send in the Tu-22 to either help you push or you help your teammates push, and then you basically just win the camp by sending in a suicide bomber, just like the B2. But this time, instead of a nuke, you have 8 cab 1500s. So yeah, that's about it. And when you save up, it's not like you don't have anything to do, right? You actually have fighters that you can loiter. This is really survivable and good at intercepting US planes. You can spam his scanners if you like. You have like, and you still have like a solid front line, so it's not like this is a bad deck at all. For the mechanized, I think we've gone through that earlier, so I'll just quickly speed through it. It's basically the same thing with a bit more ground artillery pieces and also, yeah, less helicopters, less air. So this is more of a like a frontline deck, you know. I don't really have, like, since Coastal's idea is okay, basically save up for Tu-22 and just bomb your opponent. This one's not the same anymore. You kind of you get to focus a bit more on anti-air with the ASF, and then also a lot more on the ground with the same infantry. So the idea is, if you want ASF but you want to play more infantry, go for VDV Mech because they also have BMP3s. But if you want to run, oh, I don't have armor here. Okay, but if you want to run things like just spam air, spam cruise missiles, be annoying as hell, go for VDV Coastal, because I think this is a really annoying deck to play against. All right, so that's enough for the US Arsenal. Obviously, there are other decks that I would recommend, but it would make a video that's a bit too long, so feel free to come to my Discord if you want, and I will post my decks there. And let's hop into the US side of the Arsenal. So when I make today's deck list, I basically made sure that every single specialization would be picked from the US side, so nothing would really be left out. And I could still share with you the philosophy behind why what each specialization is for. So let's start with the good old classic Marine Stryker. Obviously, this is no longer the... I don't really think this is the best deck out there anymore, but it certainly does help a lot, especially when you're in those against Russia where they have a bunch of BMPs. So this is what Stryker does best, right? They have the Booker, they have the HIMARS that is basically well, I run cluster, but you can still run the HE1. I think the HE1 is actually better, but nowadays, since I want to get rid of those really pesky tanks, that is a bit annoying to deal with sometimes, I do run the HIMARS on cluster because I know that the Cat Fey is going to deal with most of my infantry threats, so I don't really need the HIMARS to be HE, but I could still run HE if I wanted. And then I have the Lav M, which basically smokes my enemy defensive positions, or you could run anything else if you really wanted. And then on top of that, you have some of the best, or one of the best Shurads out there that US has access to, the Stryker Shurad, that can really help you when you're trying to assault your enemy positions, now that it is actually faster and a bit more expensive, that's fine. And then you still have two really reliable logistic trucks. One is the Lavelle, one is for like frontline supplies. One is the Hemi, which can basically drop the supplies somewhere safe, and then you transport the infantry near the front line and you drop them down. So that's sorry, it's a bit of a mix between Stryker and Marines, but I think I'll go through the Heli and Air Tap first, because this is more of a Marine-ish deck when it comes to Helis. So in the opener, it would be nice if you had some Super Cobras, but the Osprey right now, currently, is really one of the Helis that it makes it basically impossible to stop your early deployments with the Osprey, and that is because of the low altitude survive thing. So even if the Osprey gets downed, as long as you can make sure that you are in low altitude, then you should be fine. So you can be kind of cheesy with this, you know, open up with like maybe a manpad, like a troopers AA team, and also some troopers, maybe some scouts, or just you know that kind of stuff. It's pretty easy to get this thing into a position on a flank against Russia, and then you follow up with some like super Cobras that defend against helicopters or planes, because the sidewinders are really lethal against any of them. And then yeah, like your opener is basically pretty easy to establish as Marine alone, as the Marines alone, and then you eventually reinforce with like the really fast Stryker MGS that can two-tap any IFV besides the T-15, and then call in some Bookers or reinforce with more ACVs with infantry like the Assault Smalls and also Fort Con CQC. Like this combination inside this is really scary. And you also have Marine Raiders or Marines if you want. And then ultimately at the end of the day, if you need a bit of IV support, then let the Strikers, Dragoons, compare them with some combat engineers or maybe troopers if you like, and then roll them into position. So yeah, it's overall a pretty solid deck, and you still have the tanks, you still have the really powerful FEPs and the HC that even though it's not the best that the US arsenal has, it's still more than enough most of the time. And for the air tab, I completely forgot about this. It's a bit less ground focused, at least because I don't play that much ground, but if you want a bit more, okay, I'll tell you what this is about. So the F-35, do I have the camo? I do have the camo. I do have the camo, nice, okay. So this guy is here for the JDAMs. You can basically snipe TASs, you can snipe really important artillery pieces, SAMs, units on the field with the F-35, as it has a pretty high survivability rate compared to other planes. And then you have the CJ, which is for seed, and I don't use it that much, but when I do, I call it out. And now that it has more fuel than before, it's actually can loiter a longer amount of period of time on the field. And also these two, like these four, the Hornet and the Harrier, this is, you know, kind of for the opener, but you can still have them around. So the difference between these two planes is that the Hornet is a really good 9-kilometer plane, even though it's like, you know, it's almost as expensive as the Su-35 with way better stats than the Hornet, but still it's whatever US has that's a bit cheaper than the Raptor. And the only thing that this Hornet kind of sucks at is that it's not as agile, and if you happen to fire 9 kilometers at your opponent and you want to turn out, then the poor turning radius gives your opponent, especially Russian ones that are really agile, a really easy way to just weave in and then speed at your afterburner on and then start engaging with the 7-kilometer, like the AMRAMs or the R-77s. So this, if you happen to have a bit extra points, call in the free Harrier, you know, it's 130 points. Just have it somewhere near the Hornet, so that when your opponent is diving in for the Hornet, you can still have the Harrier to protect yourself from it. Or, you know, just have a pack, that also works. Like, I know I haven't talked much about the infantry, but I've made so many videos about Marine Stryker. At this point, I have so much experience with it as well. Where is it? Yeah, one of my only decks to actually be max level. So yeah, it's a pretty solid deck. So the only deck that managed to stay on both of these videos, of the deck introduction videos, is Armored Soft. And that, I mean, it's not because I'm really biased towards this deck, but it's obviously because a lot of things happened. A lot of things happened on the PTE where some things don't work anymore. And one of those things is that most mech riflemen squads have seven dudes in them instead of 6, and that means you can no longer pair like mech engineers with the Ranger RC or pararescue inside of an AMPV. It's just not possible anymore, because like that's only still 12 seated, and instead your only option now is the M113, which now instead of 10 seats it has 14. You can somehow cram 4 more dudes inside of it, so I guess that works out. But it does kind of deny you some options, but you still have a bunch of like versatility in this deck, so let's go through them. One, you have pararescue. You can pair them with things like Raws, the Ranger Raws, although some people prefer the like the Maws, the M4, but I think it's a bit too expensive. I prefer the cheaper Raws. And then You can run them with deltas. You can have them with like the standoff RC or the CQC RC. I think both are very capable. I do keep in mind that the CQC RC now, instead of 300 meters of range, they got increased, they got buffed to 400 as well to basically unify everything. So this is also viable. Although I think ultimately the main issue with this squad is that it doesn't really have a lot of a big quantity of these AT4s, so you kind of still need to have a way to get away, and sometimes CQCs don't really tend to like get you trapped inside of them, so it happens. So that's why I prefer the standoff variation, and so yeah, basically I would put these squads inside of an AMPV, and then put all of my Mech Engineer, Mech Dragon, which is something new, it's actually Mech Rifleman, and also the Mech Riflemen themselves, to be to put them inside the M113. So these are cheap infantry that can hold positions, but not really engage your opponents or push. And then you still have like some of the best tanks that US has to offer in the Armored Brigade, right? And then the Assault Breacher if your opponent is simply blobbing too much VDV infantry inside that one building. So definitely a really good combination, I think. And on top of that, the Guardian is now back, so if you happen to previously rely a lot on the Guardian, then, you know, well, welcome the Guardian back, I guess. Rejoice, people rejoice. And then you also get the Osprey, which is an SOF. This is also probably the heli that can really deploy fast and furious, you know, get units onto the field as fast as possible. And then you can follow up with like the weaker DAPs or some killer eggs if you wish, although they definitely aren't as good as dealing with helicopters as before. And then when it comes to like AA, I've kind of phased from using or overly relying on Pack 3s or Packs this patch, because Packs are, or like SAMs in general, are weaker, to using Raptors, which are a bit expensive, but their stealth is really what makes them so good this patch. So also I'm pretty sure they made sure that JADAMs can fire 2 rounds like one after the other, instead of being like hard locked to only one at a time, which actually was quite questionable. Apparently it's a bug. It's been in the game for like an entire year, and they just fixed it last patch or last month. So that's good, I guess. And then I even get the camo. Okay. And then like F-35 also standard, like the 2,000 pound JDAM and also the harm combination. It's quite important. So this is, I mean, I think this deck doesn't really require you to air spam as well. This is also a pretty ground focused deck. If you happen to need sniper artillery pieces that are blobbing up, then, you know, just go for the F-35 that you can call in once per phase or something, if it dies, that is. And then you still have the like some decent artillery. You know, you have the HE-GMLRS, you have the Paladins. You could run the what's it called, like the Iron Thunder, but the downside of this is that this patch you can no longer shoot the Iron Thunder for like more than like 3 rounds. You only get 3 at a time, and it's also really expensive. So I thought to myself, hey, this thing costs 310 points. Why don't I just run this? I mean, sure, it has less range. Maybe it doesn't deal as much damage. Maybe it's not as accurate, but if I need to resupply this thing, I'm fine. I can shoot 2 shells at a time. I can delete most vehicles. So, I mean, 2 tap them tanks as well. So I should be fine. I should be fine. If I laser them on the roof and it just goes poof, then yeah, the Paladin is more than suitable for the job. A cheap mortar, and then for SHORAD you have like PVADs to block, to intercept seed, cruise missiles, sometimes even nukes, and then the SHORAD can do the same. So even though I only have 1 pack in this deck, I'm pretty confident that the PVADs and the SHORAD, the Bradley SHORAD, is good enough to hold the line against cruise missile spam, or for a decent amount. So that's pretty much the idea of this deck, you know, put all the SF infantry inside AMPVs, have them roll around, outtrade your opponent because they're just simply better in terms of quantity, sorry, not quantity, quality. And then if you happen to, like, if there's some gaps in your line, you know, just let the Mech Riflemen, Mech Dragons, Mech Engineers, let them fill in the gaps, and then hold the line as you and your SF infantry roll around and try to win fights. So, yeah, that's pretty much it, the philosophy of SF Armored. And then lastly, we have the Baltic Airborne deck, which is a bit different now. Okay, it's basically hasn't changed that much compared to the last time we made that video that apparently really blown up. I guess people do like off-meta picks, so you know, we'll make more of these in the future. I do and I do appreciate that people like it. But anyways, enough of the glaze. So what's new? What's new in the Baltic Airborne deck? And boy, I have some interesting news for you, and that is last time I know that you guys saw, oh, okay, I didn't know that you could put Reki, this is how you pronounce it apparently, Reki, with the Kaitsalit, which is now 10 points more expensive, but that's fine. And you can put them inside an XA180, this 10-man seater. But this time, it's a bit different now, it's a bit different. Since the M113s now have 14 seats, you don't really need to put the Reki with the Kaitsalit, you know? You have something even better, remember, something even better that's also more popular, and that would be the Airborne NGSW. Boom! 9-man squad, plus the 5-man, now it's 14, perfect number. So, this combination, I mean, same as the Reki squad, you have 600 meters of range, you have a Moz, you have, you know, an even longer, well, just almost as much range of an HE thermobaric weapon, and still cheap, you know, like 135 points, maybe a bit more like the 100 than last time, but inside an M113, they're pretty, they can hang out. The supplies themselves, if I remember correctly, they should help the squad probably heal itself back up to full if it's like almost gone. So it's pretty good at that, and also pretty well armored against artillery, and also maybe an ATGM. Hopefully you smoke up in time for the second one. And for the actual Reki action, I do think that you could put 2 of them inside a CV90, but I don't do that much. You can kind of just have them poke around. They're actually cheaper now. And the best thing about this squad is that I would actually prefer not to use the NGSW or the next generation weapons. And the reason for that is because this one doesn't really have any of the AT, which is kind of weird. And it also has the really long-range sniper rifle, which I highly recommend. And it's mainly because you get to snipe ATGMs. You don't really need artillery to fire at it, and it still won't get spotted because of how, because you know, it's right here, it says it's suppressed, so people don't really spot it unless they have recon infantry nearby. And the mods, it can basically defend itself, and a smoke, and a laser, only for 55 points. I don't know what the guys at SPK were doing, but this squad is busted. So you should definitely run this. A standalone, it's perfectly fine. You don't really need to run it. I mean, but still, don't expect to face check your opponent and win. Don't do that. Just have it somewhere where it can provide you good enough vision, and it's gonna slowly poke at your enemy, and he's gonna get really annoyed at this squad. And even if he tries to kill it, you know it's only 55 points. So that's why I think the squad is really nice this patch. And still, this is, I mean, these are like some of the pretty niche combos that you don't expect to run into. And still, you have like more, you know, you can now put Mechanizatia Kayanuki along with the SUV, so you basically have the same Monostroke plus Engineer Shermaviga combo, but for Baltic Airborne. Sorry, but for Baltic. I think this is only Baltic exclusive. You can put them inside an M113 as well. So you have a bunch of 84s. You have a flashbang squad that can breach buildings. Although this combination does lose to the mechanized one, I still think that it is a pretty solid combo. And then you still get things like, what else? You have the Tsarukai, which is obviously somehow just better than the SSO. I think it's just better than the SSO. And then a gun on a track. So you know, you get the Thunderbolt with APS if you need to do some action against ATGMs. But against an actual tank, I think the Leopard 2A8 is obviously the better option. And you could even do this, although I don't really recommend. I think the Type X is also a pretty valuable vehicle because it has the spikes, but you could drop everything on the Leopard for the 4th Thunderbolt. Actually, no. You could bring the armor. Okay, that works if you want. And then bring anything else that you like, but the vehicle tab is also up to you. And then for the support tab, I have a bit less things to bring here this time. You could bring any of like the Panzerhaubitze, you could bring the K9 Co. I do like this because you do already have access to the like the laser guided laser designation on the Rike, sorry, not Rike, Reki. And then you also have the Kiowa that also has a laser designation pod. So it's pretty nice to have laser guided munitions. And then you also have the Brutus, which to me, I think, you know, it's fine depending on which one you like. I just find the code to be a bit more versatile for almost the same price. And then for other artillery pieces, I think this one shoots a bit slow, but the M109 is still okay. And then, yeah, I definitely like, I know last time I made this video, or like a video based on this deck, it had the standard Brutus, which I think is okay, but it's way more expensive now, so I would prefer to just buy ground units and then let the Co shoot at most of my targets. Although I do have two Shorad units, so the Nasms and the Avenger. This one is for like dealing with units on the road. Like if I need to keep up with my convoy, then this is gonna help. Although it does struggle against things like the Mi-28 Lemur missiles because they have pretty much the same range. And then the Nasms cannot really fire on the move, so I think it would be wise to actually bring the AMRAAM this time because it has a bit more range than previously. I know last time I said don't bring it, but you could if you wanted. I think this would help you if you happen to struggle against them. And also the Iris, but which doesn't have a lot of range, but it does help sometimes. So I think that would be it for the support tab. And then for the air tab, yeah, this is kind of up to you really. This patch, they actually introduced a really good, or like a really good configuration that previously was not possible, and that would be running cluster bombs, 6 cluster bombs on a F-15E, the Strike Eagle. This is capable of destroying even the toughest of tanks like the SEB-B3, the T-14, the T-15s even. So this is definitely quite capable, although I think this deck would probably not struggle that much against like Russian armored. So I do think that, you know, you could run the cheaper 4 2,000-pound bombs. That also works, and then you get an ASF, 2 ASF, and also a Sex Eagle. And this one is completely up to you how you want to run it. You could run like the classic 4 harms. Where are my 4 harms?
Oh, what is it? I almost threw that plane.
4 harms, 3 JASMs, or like 5 JASMs and 2 harms. That's up to you. Just to destroy like high rises and buildings that are kind of annoying. That's perfectly up to you. So you have a bit of everything here. And then I think that should be about it. Oh, right, the heli tab. So Kiowas are probably arguably the best Shorad helicopter that US has access to right now. It's cheap, and then it also, you know, they trade well. They have good ECM, and then although you no longer have access to the Guardian, which is a little bit sad, the longbow is still okay. You know, it has a bit less range, which is, it does kind of hurt. I would, honestly though, if you wanted my opinion, I kind of want the longbow and SOF and give the Guardian back, please. But we don't know if that's going to happen. So for now, just stick with the longbow, and if you need something with a bit more range, the Apache's Hellfire is actually has a bit more reach, although it is semi-active right here. But both helis have basically the same ECM, same health, same armor, basically the same stuff. So you don't really like, you can run the Apache. I think you'll be just fine. And remember, it can be laser guided for some surprises. So that would be about it. You get some, you know, transport helis, although it can't be fast, you know, deployed as rapidly as the Osprey. It's still good enough. So yeah, I think this would be it for all of the decks that I would like to introduce today so far. Yeah, guys, thank you for watching until the very end. I hope you find these helpful. If you want the deck file directly, I have them on my Discord. I'll post them. But if you have some other decks you want to try out, you can also message me or leave it down in the comments. So, guys, thank you for watching. I'll be working on some other videos and also some projects in the future. Thank you, take care, and bye-bye.